Spectres. Written and read by David Longhorn. Tina was pissed off. Her feet hurt, her back ached, and she was sweaty. Way too sweaty to enjoy the view, which Tom insisted she do at regular intervals. They'd walked for at least 3 hours since leaving the hostel, and they'd drunk most of their water. Tom had, of course, been blasé about water, food, finding their way, the whole shebang. "We can always get some water from a mountain stream," he'd said, "and we've got some candy bars as well as those sandwiches I brought. Just look at the view, isn't it great? That's what we're here for." "Are we lost?" Tina asked bluntly. She learned early in their relationship that subtlety was wasted on Tom. Simple questions with yes-no answers were the only kind that got his hop-toed mind into focus. "No," he insisted. "You can't get lost in these mountains. It's Bavaria, not Mongolia. We saw a trail marker just a few minutes back, and look, there are people all over the place. If we need to ask the way, we will. But we won't." Tina looked dubiously at the people he was pointing at. They were at least half a mile ahead, several hundred feet further up the slope. And there was something about them that Tina didn't like, something that felt a little off. She paused, adjusting her backpack for the umpteenth time. Once she was a little more comfortable, she raised her hand to shade her eyes and peered at the other hikers. They'd stopped and were apparently talking. Or maybe arguing, she thought. Maybe he's another jerk who sets off up a mountain trail without a map. This vacation had been her idea. That was the most annoying part. She'd thought they would enjoy good food, maybe see a few sights, and forge a stronger, healthier relationship. Instead, all the problems they'd have back home had just resurfaced. Tom insisted they get out into the countryside and find the real Bavaria, whatever that meant. It seemed to Tina that the real Bavaria consisted of restaurants, fashion, quaint little hotels, and not being sweaty all the time. But to Tom it meant beer festivals, folk dancing, and hiking several miles every day from one hostel to the next. And each hostel had one big room rammed with bunk beds occupied by yet more sweaty people, most of whom seemed to have consumed a lot of garlic sausage. "But I'm not giving up on him," she told herself. "Sure, he's a fixer-upper, but anything beats having to start dating again." When she'd first met Tom, she'd been impressed by his looks, then by his kindness, boyish interest in almost everything, and willingness to listen. As their relationship had developed, she'd come to suspect that his listening skills were more about daydreaming while she talked about her problems. But all in all, they were doing okay, and he did want them to be happy together. Happy hiking up a mountain, sure, but she could live with that, for now. She looked again at the couple ahead of them. She was almost sure it was a couple, anyhow. One was tall and kind of gangly, like Tom, while the other had a distinctly feminine way of waving her arms around. She giggled at the thought of someone else having a really bad time, arguing all the way to the top. Tom wasn't so bad, really. They plodded on up the winding trail and soon entered a small clump of trees. When they emerged, Tom could no longer see the hikers up ahead. For a miracle, Tom actually suggested they stop for a while to get their second wind and have something to eat. The sandwiches he'd brought from a convenience store proved underwhelming but filling. Tina took off her boots and massaged her feet. Then she took out her phone. There was no signal up here, of course, but she decided to take a few pictures. One was of Tom reading the German guidebook he'd bought at a small tourist centre when they got off the train. His German was, in his own words, basic. To Tina it seemed non-existent, but he made a point of opening the book every chance he got and regaling her with various entries on the area. "It says here," he said slowly, "that the mountain is said to be haunted by, I think that's spirits? Ghosts? Maybe ghosts." "Ghosts of women who died from sore feet," she muttered. "Yeah, it must be ghosts," Tom continued, absorbed in the half-understood text. "It seems people sometimes see strange figures up ahead on the trail. If they see these phantoms, tragedy ensues, but it doesn't say what or why. And then there's something about the Brockengespenst." "I know what that is," Tina said. "It was on the History Channel or Discovery or the BBC, I don't know. Point is, people go up this mountain and they see moving figures, kind of projected onto a cloud. It looks spooky, but it's just a mirage." Tom was only half listening. He looked up from his guidebook and was staring up the path ahead. Tina, sighing, looked too and saw the hikers from before. They were a little nearer and seemed to be having another argument. Or maybe it was the same one continued. The woman was apparently stomping back and forth, still waving her arms. The man was sitting on a rock, unmoving. She took out her phone, deciding to film them. She could post the video with the caption, "Mountain Breakup," or maybe something a bit less on the nose. At least she wasn't busting Tom's ass over what were, when she thought about it, a few minor issues. The point is that they were doing something together. That was what cemented a relationship. She zoomed in, but the couple were at the limit of the camera's resolution and looked kind of pixelated. Still, there was something slightly odd about those two figures. She was trying to work out what it was when it happened. The man stood up and started walking up the trail, turning his back on the woman. The woman, who wore her long dark hair loose, stooped. Evidently she was picking something up, something roundish, dull grey. Then Tina gasped as she ran up behind the man and raised both hands over his head. Tina almost dropped her phone in shock, but then got the image centered again. The man was lying face down, once more, unmoving, and the woman was looking straight back at Tina. "No!" she exclaimed, looking away from the screen and up the mountain path. "What is it?" asked Tom. I think I just saw—" She almost said a murder, but fell silent in confusion. There was nobody in the trail ahead. The woman in her yellow jacket was no longer visible. Tina used her phone camera again, expecting to see a body being dragged into the bushes, but there were no signs of life at all. Tom was looking puzzled. "You okay?" "Yeah, I think I hallucinated or something. Maybe it was a trick of the light, but it looked so real." She pulled on her boots and began to do up the laces. Tom would normally take this as his cue to start marching off up the trail before she was ready, but this time he lingered. Then he gave her his lopsided grin that was still sort of charming, and started walking, but slower than usual, so it was easy for her to catch up. They tramped up the slope in silence for a few minutes. It was a pleasant silence, and Tina started to relax. That weird incident, she must have misinterpreted something innocent. Hell, maybe it had been some kind of German folk dance. The thought made her chuckle. "Glad you're enjoying it," said Tom, smiling down at her. "Of course I'm enjoying it, love," she said. "I like it when we do things together." She took his arm, felt a brief resistance, then he relaxed. Tom had always been a little reluctant to show affection in public, but that touch of shyness was charming in its way. They hiked on some more, the gradient getting steeper and the terrain rougher. Now there were no trees, just clumps of wild flowers, bushes hugging the meagre soil on these windy slopes. "You think we'll make it?" she asked, as they reached a small clearing with yet another wonderful view. She meant make it to the top, of course, but Tom slowed his pace, looked down at her with a morose expression. No, to be honest," he said, "I don't think we will. We really need to talk." For a few moments Tina struggled to understand what he was saying. Phrases like "need some space" and "not really working" and "see other people" echoed round inside her skull, but they were just random syllables at first. It made no sense. And then, with understanding, came rage. She lost it, big time, and started ranting at Tom. All the minor annoyances of many months combined with her fury at rejection produced an explosive mixture. As she strode up and down, waving her hands or jabbing an accusatory finger, Tom just sat on a rock and looked down at his boots. This enraged her even more. All the sacrifices she'd made, all the bullshit she'd put up with, just to make their relationship work, and now here he was, daring to suggest he was bored with her? Bored with them? He was like some spoiled brat in a sweet shop deciding he wanted something new. "No way do you just get to walk away from me," she yelled. If he just said something, anything, to placate her, it might have been different. But he didn't. Tom got up and plodded slowly away, still heading up the trail, acting as if they were simply on vacation, as if he could walk away from her and all her troublesome feelings. Her hair had somehow come loose, and it fell into her eyes as she bent down and picked up the rock. Somewhere, almost smothered beneath her anger, a small voice told her this was how it had to be. It was not her choice, but her fate. She ran a few paces and lifted the rough grey rock over her head and brought it down. The crunch was much louder than she'd expected. In contrast, the sound of Tom falling face down into the gorse by the trail was softer, almost gentle. Tina, able to think now, swung around to look downhill. Two figures were just visible, one holding her phone in front of her face. As Tina watched, they vanished, leaving her alone on the mountain. She knelt by Roy, crying now and pleading, "Let's give it another chance, darling.